We already know that inadequate safety precautions left 300,000 people without drinking water. Now we know that those weak standards impacted people hundreds of miles away as well. This massive spill is a prime example of why strong federal regulation and enforcement are important, why it takes a federal response to deal with an environmental disaster. Chemical leaks don't stop contaminating waterways at state borders, just like oil spills don't stop having an environmental impact at the state line. That's why we have to come together as a nation to prevent these disasters, to deal with the ones that occur, and to hold the perpetrators accountable. No state can deal with these issues alone. Perhaps someone should remind Republicans about this before they do away with all of our vital environmental regulation. We've already heard about roads that can create solar energy, and thanks to a new discovery, someday we may see roads that clean up pollution. Scientists have found a new type of asphalt that can actually capture and store carbon, and amazingly, it's affordable. These findings were published recently in the journal Applied Materials and Interfaces, and they could provide a way to clean harmful carbon out of our atmosphere. The material was discovered by scientists trying to find ways to keep carbon dioxide from natural gas wells out of our environment. They discovered an asphalt powder that can absorb carbon molecules at room temperature and hold 114% of its own weight in carbon. In a news release about the findings, one of the researchers said, quote, "This provides an ultra-inexpensive route to a high-value material for the capture of carbon dioxide from natural gas streams," end quote. This purpose alone could go a long way towards protecting our environment. The implications for the future make it a much more important discovery. Building roads that fight global warming may sound like science fiction, but before we know it, it could be science fact. Despite many warnings about Roundup-resistant genetically modified crops, our government has just approved Monsanto's next generation of herbicide-tolerant GMOs. According to EcoWatch.com, last week, the U.S. Department of Agriculture approved the sale and planting of dicamba-tolerant cotton and soybeans. Cornell University study found that exposure to the herbicide dicamba can cause serious health issues like shortness of breath, muscle weakness, and changes in the human central nervous system. However, thanks to the USDA, we may soon be exposed to 88 times more dicamba on soybeans and 14 times more on cotton. And the latest genetic modification will likely mean a future of dicamba-resistant weeds, just like the weeds that have become resistant to Roundup. Does it really take a rocket scientist to see how this is going to end? If we keep allowing Monsanto to introduce these herbicide-resistant GMOs, weeds will become more resistant, and we will be exposing ourselves to more potent and powerful and prevalent chemicals. We have to stop this dangerous cycle before it's too late. If you find yourself posting lots of selfies on social media, science says you may be a narcissist. A recent study from The Ohio State University examined 800 men between the ages of 18 and 40. After the participants answered questionnaires about their behavior and social media activity, researchers were able to determine the link between posting pictures of yourself and narcissistic behavior. The lead author of the study, Jesse Fox, said, "It's not surprising that men who post a lot of selfies and spend more time editing them are narcissistic, but this is the first time it has actually been confirmed in a study. Posting the occasional self-portrait is normal, but posting a constant stream of selfies might be a sign of mental illness. Or it may just be a sign that some of us are spending way too much time with smartphones and computers." And finally, if you've been priced out of the market for today's electric vehicles, Chevy may have a plan for your next car purchase. General Motors has released their new plan for the Bolt, which is their concept electric car designed for attainability, not exclusivity. In other words, the Bolt may soon be Chevy's electric vehicle for the masses. The new vehicle will also have the ability to self-park once the driver is out of the car and let us use an app to direct the car to return and pick us up at the same location. The Bolt will have a 200-mile extended range that should give buyers comfort about being stranded, and it will compete with Tesla's Model 3, which will have a similar price tag. At $30,000, the Bolt and the Model 3 are still somewhat pricey, but they're thousands cheaper than current electric models, and they will help more Americans make the switch to green vehicles. Mary Barra, the new chief executive of General Motors, said, "Chevrolet believes electrification is a pillar of future transportation and needs to be affordable for a wider segment of customers. Just like Nissan's electric Leaf and Tesla's Model 3, the Bolt will put electric vehicles into the hands of millions more Americans and help our nation take a big step toward a cleaner, greener future." And that's the way it is for the week of January 19th, 2015. I'm Tom Hartman on Science and Green News.
is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And I wanted to get your thoughts on a completely different topic. This has very little to do with politics, and I think everything to do with American popular culture. There is a woman by the name of Lenore Skenazy, and I may be mispronouncing that, Skenazy. Maybe it's Skenazy. I'm not sure. She's a mother of two in New York City. She is referred to as the America's worst mom because she wrote a newspaper column somewhere between bragging and asserting that living in New York City, she wanted her 9-year-old son to know how to use the subway system. She taught him how to use the subway system, and she now lets him ride the subway alone. Everybody freaked out. And part of that freak out then led to her writing a book called Free Range Kids, How to Raise Self-Reliant Children. And she actually has now a TV show that's on the Discovery Life channel where she's helping bubble-wrapped kids come out of the bubble wrap. You know, like there was one of the stories that they talk about in one of the first episodes of the series, 10-year-old Sam. His mom wouldn't let him ride a bike. Oh, I'm afraid he'll fall and get hurt. His mother wouldn't let him cut up his own meat. Well, he shouldn't be eating meat. I mean, everybody should be a vegan, but nonetheless, Mom thinks I'll cut my fingers off. And he was not allowed to play rough sports like skating. And Sam says, I just want to do things by myself. The point, Peter Gray, a research psychologist at Boston College, says that the actual rate of strangers abducting or molesting children is very small, more likely to happen at the hands of relatives or family friends. And the statistics since the 50s, well, I'll quote from the New York Times, this piece in the Personal Health, Jane Brody on Health and Aging, Jane Brody writing for the New York Times. She says, experts say there is no more crime against children by strangers today, and probably significantly less than when I was growing up in the 40s and 50s, a time when I walked to school alone and played outdoors with friends unsupervised by adults. Now, first of all, in the 40s and 50s, the population of the United States was half of what it is right now. But there's no more crime now than there was then, particularly with regard to kids. And if anything, it's gone down. And I mean, I remember growing up in the 50s. I was born in 51. When I was a child, right, when I was 6 years old, and I went to 5 years old kindergarten, 6 years old first grade. We were living on Cleveland Avenue, and I was going to, I'm forgetting the name of the school, but it was some school in Lansing, Michigan, and I had to walk about a half a mile to and from school. And the first week or so of school, my mom walked me to school every day, and she was there waiting for me to pick me up. When we came home, we walked back home. We did not have two cars. My dad drove to work. And then after 2 weeks or so, Mom knew that I had it figured out. And as a 6-year-old, a first grader, I walked a half a mile through downtown Lansing, Michigan to go to school. I walked 4 miles to go to junior high school. Both ways, 8 miles altogether. I say this to my kid. Years ago, my kids, when they were younger, we were in Michigan, and I was like, I walked 4 miles every day, even in the snow, even in the winter, to go to school and all the way back. And they're like, yeah, right, Dad. So we stopped at my parents' house, set the odometer to 0, the trip meter, and drove to Walter French Junior High School where I went. And it was 4 miles, like 3.8, something like that, but close. Nobody thought twice about it. School got out. Everybody was walking. My friend Bill Thomas and I used to, when we were 7, 8, 9 years old, Bill got a BB gun, and we used to go down. There was this pond it was at least a mile from where we lived. There was a forest where a river went, it was a large creek or a small river went through it. I don't think it was big enough to have a name, or if it did, I never knew the name. We'd go down there and we'd dig up crayfish the first week that Bill had his gun, we went down and we shot frogs. And then I don't remember if Bill said it or my recollection is that Bill said it. He said, what if God is keeping track of all the frogs we kill? And we had like this serious theological discussion about it. We both went to the Methodist church down the street from us, and we decided, okay, we're not going to shoot any more frogs. And from that point to this, I've not shot any living thing since that point, since I was 7 or 8 or 9 years old, however old it was. But we grew up outdoors. Louise and her brother used to bicycle, literally across Michigan. They would go on bicycle trips that were like 3, 4, 5 hours, where they would travel 30, 40 miles. My friend Clark and I hopped a train in Lansing and ended up in Grand Rapids and went to and then hitchhiked over to and this is when we were 14 years old, and ended up at my Aunt Marilyn's house. Now, my parents were not happy about that, but nobody arrested them for not being bad parents. Nobody arrested me. My Aunt Marilyn cut my hair off. It was hysterical, but God bless her. I love her. She's still around. And the older sister of my father. But it's like we lived out in the world. And now we've got these bubble-wrapped kids and these helicopter parents, and the consequence of this is that everybody's afraid. Kids are not getting any physical activity. Obesity is 60% higher than it was among children than when I was a kid. And, I go into this conversation with a certain amount of trepidation, just like, when Neil and I were talking about the 60s, or the 80s, rather. Neil is younger than I am. He doesn't remember the 60s. He might not have even been around in the 60s, but I remember the 60s and the 50s. And there's a certain amount of, back when I was a young whippersnapper, I don't want to sound like that guy, right? I remember when I was a kid, my grandfather talking about, well, things were better when I was young. These kids today, they've gone to hell. Look at this long hair, they're smoking pot. That kind of stuff. Only he said it with a Norwegian accent. I don't want to sound like that. But that said, I really think we're screwing up our child rearing practices, and then on top of that, this just in the I live in Washington D.C. here. Maryland is right next door, and this from Fox News, of all places, a Maryland couple that believes in free range parenting. That's what it's called. That's what my mother and father did, right? I would leave if I was home. If I wasn't home by dark, my mom would get upset. I'd get in trouble. And I remember one time when I was around 10 that I had stayed over at my friend Jerry Stamsky's house way, way too long. And as I was walking home, my mom was riding my bicycle up the street, crying, looking for me. I'll always remember that. It horrified me that I had so frightened my mom. But I was really late. It was like 10 or 11 at night, and I was a little kid. And that was it. So anyhow, a Maryland couple that believes in free-range parenting said that they are being investigated for child neglect after police picked up their kids, ages 6 and 10, walking home alone from a park. And the Montgomery County Child Protective Services reportedly followed up and forced the parents to sign a safety plan acknowledging that they would not let the kids go unsupervised. I used to run a community for abused kids in New Hampshire. The first kid we did intake on was the daughter of her father by her sister. The second kid we did intake on had been tied to a pole in the basement with his brother. His brother starved to death. The neighbors smelled his brother's rotting body and called the police, and they rescued Tony, and he got placed in the facility that Louise and I had started. That's child abuse. Child abuse is not letting your kids walk 3 blocks home from the park to your house. Or do you think I'm wrong? You know the number. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And by the way, if you'd like to pitch in and help out with that program that Louise and I started, go to hunterschool.org. They could use a little help right now.